Clara sank into the soft cushions of her living room couch, exhaustion pressing down on her like a heavy blanket after another long day of work, the kind that left her body stiff and her mind restless. And yet, tonight, unlike other nights, she could not simply drift into sleep, as if the quiet house itself was holding its breath, and the gentle silver of moonlight spilling through the half-open curtains painted patterns across the wooden floor that seemed to move with her thoughts, twisting and turning as memories she hadn't wanted to face began to surface, faces from the past, moments of loss and longing, dreams left unfinished, and a subtle ache in her chest that she had grown accustomed to but never fully understood. A quiet yearning that made her heart thrum with the kind of unease that could turn the simplest of evenings into something almost unbearable. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, brushing against the windows with soft rustling sounds that mingled with the faint hum of distant traffic, creating a lullaby that was both soothing and unsettling. And she thought about the decisions she had made over the years, the paths she had taken, the ones she had ignored, and the weight of them pressed on her shoulders as if the walls of the house were closing in, holding her accountable for the life she had built, a life that was safe, predictable, yet filled with gaps she couldn't quite explain, empty spaces that had once been filled with laughter, love, and connection, now only echoes and shadows, memories she sometimes wished she could erase but knew she never could. She let her eyes drift shut, hoping that the calm darkness behind her eyelids would bring her a measure of peace. Yet just as the first tendrils of sleep began to touch her mind, the faintest creak sounded from the hallway, subtle but deliberate, the kind of sound that made her chest tighten with sudden alertness, a noise familiar yet foreign, like the house itself had decided to speak, and she opened her eyes to see the silhouette of a figure entering the room, moving slowly, cautiously, almost as if testing whether she was awake, and her heart began to race, the soft rhythm of her life disrupted by the presence of another soul. And then recognition hit her, sharp and immediate, her son, Lucas, who she had expected to be safely tucked in his room hours ago, now standing at the threshold, hesitant, eyes wide with an emotion she could not immediately read, a mixture of fear, curiosity, and something heavier, an unspoken burden that weighed on his young shoulders, making him seem older than his years, and she could not help but notice the way the moonlight caught the contours of his face, highlighting the lines of worry that were rarely there, the subtle tremble of his hand as he reached toward her, the slow, deliberate pace that carried a gravity far beyond a simple visit, and as he approached the couch, the air between them seemed charged, heavy with unsaid words and unacknowledged feelings, the kind of silence that presses against the heart and refuses to let go, and he sat beside her, careful not to disturb the fragile stillness, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, yet distant enough to maintain a boundary neither of them dared cross, and in that moment, she noticed everything, the slight slump of his shoulders, the restless tapping of his foot against the wooden floor, the way his eyes flitted between her face and the floor, never quite settling, as though he were gathering courage from the shadows themselves, and she felt a strange mix of protectiveness and curiosity, a pull toward him that was instinctive, maternal, yet tinged with a recognition that tonight would not be ordinary, that something unspoken had brought him here, to this room, to this precise moment, and it sent a shiver down her spine, a whisper of anticipation she couldn't ignore. Lucas shifted, and the soft brush of his fingers against her arm made her inhale sharply, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, yet it carried with it the weight of everything he had not said, a language of emotion that bypassed words entirely, and she turned her head slightly to meet his gaze, and in that look, she glimpsed the storm of his thoughts, a tempest she could neither name nor predict, and her own heart responded, a drumbeat quickening in her chest, and she realized that the quiet house, the gentle moonlight, the night itself, had conspired to create a space where truth might finally emerge, fragile and honest, and for the first time in days, she felt the stirrings of hope entwined with fear, a delicate balance of emotions that left her breathless, for she knew that whatever he had come to tell her, it would change the rhythm of their lives, shift the familiar patterns they had both grown accustomed to, and perhaps reveal feelings that had long been buried beneath the routines of daily life, unnoticed yet ever present, and she felt her pulse quicken as Lucas cleared his throat softly, a sound that was almost swallowed by the stillness around them, and then he spoke, words tentative at first, hesitant and low, like a fragile bird testing the wind before flight, and she leaned in slightly, straining to catch every syllable, knowing instinctively that this moment, this fleeting, fragile intersection of lives, was the start of something irreversible, something that would echo through every quiet evening, every solitary hour, every heartbeat that followed. And as he spoke, the cadence of his voice, the subtle rise and fall, the way he paused, searching for courage, painted a picture in her mind of the young man he was becoming, and the mother he had always known she was, and she felt an ache, sweet and bitter at once, a longing for connection that had been denied by distance, distraction, and the relentless march of time, and she realized that the boundaries between them had shifted, quietly, imperceptibly, yet permanently, as if the night itself had conspired to rewrite the rules of their relationship, and in that suspended moment, the house seemed to breathe with them, the shadows stretching and curling around the edges of the room, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of cars passing by, all conspiring to create a stage for the unfolding drama of their lives. And Clara's thoughts raced, questions forming faster than she could articulate them, yet the pull of the present held her captive, insisting that she listen, that she observe, that she feel every nuance, every tremor of emotion that Lucas carried with him, and she did, because she knew instinctively that this night, this visit, this simple walk into a quiet room while she slept, was the beginning of a revelation, a turning point that neither of them could anticipate fully, yet both would remember forever, the kind of memory that settles deep into the soul, shaping the way one feels, thinks, and acts in the days to come. And as the moonlight danced across the room, casting silver streaks across the couch and floor, Clara held her breath, letting the moment stretch, fragile and infinite, knowing that when words finally emerged, they would carry the weight of unspoken dreams, hopes, fears, and love, and that nothing would ever be quite the same again, because sometimes the quietest nights, the gentlest touches, the softest words, have the power to awaken hearts, reveal truths, and begin stories that last a lifetime. And in that silence, in that delicate pause between one heartbeat and the next, Clara felt it, the undeniable, inescapable pull of connection, the kind that transcends ordinary life, the subtle promise that love, however complicated, however unexpected, is always waiting to be recognized, embraced, and cherished. And as she finally exhaled, a small shiver running through her, she knew that tonight, everything had changed, and the story they were about to write together had only just begun, fragile, uncertain, yet radiant with possibility. And she watched Lucas, his expression caught between vulnerability and courage, and she realized that sometimes, the simplest gestures, a quiet presence, a careful touch, a whispered word, carry more weight than grand declarations. And in the stillness of the night, under the soft silver glow, Clara understood that life's most profound moments often arrive unexpectedly, in ordinary rooms, at ordinary times, transforming the familiar into something breathtaking, intimate, and unforgettable. The morning sunlight filtered through the curtains, soft and gentle, yet Clara could feel the weight of last night still pressing against her chest, a mixture of anticipation and unease that refused to leave, her thoughts a whirlwind of what Lucas had said, the hesitant way he had spoken, the strange gravity in his eyes. And even as she went about her routine, preparing tea and arranging the living room, she kept glancing toward the hallway, expecting him to appear at any moment, uncertain if she wanted him to, because the tension between them had shifted something unspoken, a current of emotion that both frightened and fascinated her. And when she finally saw him in the garden, crouched by the flower bed, hands brushing soil aside as if searching for answers there, her heart leapt and sank at once, a conflicting rhythm that mirrored the storm inside her. And she took a deep breath before stepping outside, the crisp morning air brushing against her cheeks, the scent of earth and blossoms mingling in a way that made her feel alive, aware, painfully attentive to every detail, from the way sunlight caught the strands of his hair to the subtle crease of concentration between his brows. And she realized how much she had missed noticing these small things, the quiet presence of someone who mattered, the nuance of expression, the way a slight shift of posture could communicate what words could not. And she approached slowly, cautious not to startle him, yet eager to bridge the invisible distance that had grown overnight, the unspoken tension a tangible thread connecting them, fragile yet undeniable. And she called softly, "Lucas," a single word that carried more weight than she could articulate, and he looked up, startled for just a moment, eyes wide, then softened as recognition and relief flickered across his face, and he smiled tentatively, a small, awkward curve of lips that revealed both gratitude and uncertainty, and Clara felt a warmth, a flicker of hope, as she stepped closer, heart pounding, noticing the subtle changes in him, the way he had grown in ways that were invisible until she truly looked, his shoulders broader, hands steadier, yet the vulnerability lingered, a delicate balance between strength and fragility, and it made her chest ache with a mix of pride, longing, and unnameable emotion, and she struggled to find the right words, because last night had shifted everything, left her caught between caution and desire to understand, and the garden seemed to hold its breath with them, the soft hum of birds, the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of life beyond the walls of their home, all merging into a background that made their shared space feel intimate, sacred, and yet precarious, a stage for revelations that could not be rushed, and Lucas finally spoke, his voice low, careful, almost swallowed by the surrounding quiet. "I didn't mean to wake you like that, but I needed to see you," and the simplicity of the words struck her like a wave, washing over her with unanticipated intensity, stirring a torrent of emotion she hadn't expected to confront, because the phrase carried more than it seemed: a need, connection, vulnerability, longing, and she realized that last night's tension was merely the beginning of something far deeper, something neither of them could articulate fully yet. The kind of emotion that lingered in glances, pauses, and hesitant gestures, and she nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat, aware that words alone were insufficient to navigate the labyrinth of feeling between them, and she reached out, a tentative brush of her fingers along his arm, and he flinched ever so slightly, then relaxed, allowing the connection to settle, subtle, quiet, yet electrifying, the intimacy of shared space and time folding around them, and Clara felt her breath catch, her pulse quicken, every nerve alert, as if she were simultaneously part of a memory and a dream, suspended in a moment that refused to move forward or backward, and Lucas shifted, breaking the spell of stillness, picking up a small trowel, returning to the soil with a distracted motion, yet she could see the undercurrent of thought in his eyes, the unspoken questions, fears, and confessions waiting for the right moment, and Clara realized that she, too, had been holding back, the cautious layers of a mother's protectiveness intertwined with her own longing for connection and understanding, and the duality of emotion made her chest ache with tenderness, frustration, and anticipation all at once, and she wondered how they had reached this delicate juncture, when the simplest touch or glance could carry the weight of years of unspoken words, and yet here they were, in the quiet light of morning, bound by a shared need to acknowledge something neither had fully named, and the garden itself seemed to amplify the intensity, the rustling leaves whispering encouragement, the warmth of the sun brushing against their skin, the earth beneath their feet grounding them in a reality that was both ordinary and extraordinary, and Clara felt her heart swell with empathy and a deep, almost aching awareness of his presence, his growth, the silent evolution of a boy into a man who still needed her, yet was beginning to stand on his own, and the complexity of that realization struck her, stirring a mix of pride, fear, and love, and she tried to speak, her voice breaking the fragile rhythm. "I've missed this, missed you," and he looked up, startled again, but a smile tugged at the corners of his lips, fleeting yet genuine, and the acknowledgement passed between them like a silent promise, an understanding that while the past could not be changed, the present offered a chance to bridge distance, heal unspoken wounds, and cultivate connection that had long been dormant, and she felt a subtle tension relax, a tentative trust forming in the space between them, delicate and precious, and Lucas set down the trowel, running a hand through his hair, hesitant, then finally saying, "I've been thinking, a lot, about us, about everything we've missed," and the words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, carrying a gravity that startled her. Because they were both adults, navigating complex emotions, yet bound by bonds that were intricate, tender, and impossible to ignore, and Clara's mind raced, processing, questioning, imagining, yet never fully knowing, and she felt her pulse quicken, aware that this conversation, these morning hours, could change the fabric of their relationship in subtle yet profound ways, the way a stone dropped in water ripples outward, touching everything in its path, and she stepped closer, cautious yet drawn, noting the shift in his posture, the slight tremor of his hand as he reached toward her again, the intensity in his eyes that mirrored her own swirling emotions, and she realized that life had presented them with a rare, fragile opportunity to speak, connect, and perhaps begin a journey together in a new way, one that honored the past yet embraced possibility, and she reached out, brushing her fingers against his arm again, more deliberately this time, and he did not flinch, but instead allowed the touch, a small gesture of trust, and in that instant, the unspoken words began to settle into something tangible, something she could hold on to, the beginnings of dialogue, of understanding, of acknowledgement. And she felt her throat tighten with emotion, the ache of longing softened by hope, the weight of silence giving way to shared recognition, and she realized that the garden, the morning, the quiet space between them, had become a canvas for emotions too complex to name, too delicate to force, and yet essential to honor, and she whispered again, "I'm here." Listening, and the words, simple yet profound, seemed to unlock something in Lucas, a subtle shift in his expression, a softening, a willingness to meet her halfway, to navigate the delicate terrain of heart and mind together, and he nodded, eyes glimmering. The tension between hope and fear, expectation and caution, written clearly in his face, and the air around them seemed to hum with possibility, the morning sun casting gentle light on a scene both ordinary and extraordinary, and Clara realized that the unspoken words, the shared glances, the hesitant gestures, were laying the foundation for a connection that transcended simple explanation, that held the promise of understanding, healing, and intimacy. The kind of connection that arrives quietly, almost imperceptibly, yet changes everything when it is finally acknowledged, and she felt the garden itself embrace them, the flowers swaying softly in a gentle breeze, the soil rich beneath their feet, the world beyond temporarily paused, leaving them suspended in a space of delicate revelation, and she knew instinctively that this moment, these unspoken words, would remain with them, shaping their interactions, their trust, and the possibilities for what could come. And as Lucas finally leaned back against the garden bench, exhaling softly, a weight lifted from his shoulders though more remained, she smiled, the ache in her chest softened by hope, the promise of dialogue, and the subtle understanding that though they could not change the past, they could navigate the present together, carefully, bravely, and with hearts open to the complexity of what love, connection, and understanding could mean. And in that shared silence, the morning stretched out around them, infinite in its tenderness, charged with the quiet intensity of emotions acknowledged but not yet fully spoken, and Clara knew, with a certainty that surprised her, that this was only the beginning, the fragile first chapter in a story neither could have anticipated, yet one they were now living together, step by careful step, word by unspoken word, heart by heart. And as she reached out to brush a strand of hair from his forehead, the gesture simple, yet intimate, she felt the unmistakable pulse of connection, fragile, tender, yet undeniable, and the garden, the morning, the quiet house beyond, all seemed to bend around them, holding them, waiting, witnessing the birth of something quietly profound, a tapestry of emotion, longing, and trust that would continue to unfold, delicate, slow, and irrevocably theirs. That night, Clara could not sleep, her mind still buzzing from the quiet morning in the garden and the weight of unspoken words lingering like an unfinished melody. The house bathed in the gentle silver of moonlight that spilled through the curtains, casting shifting patterns across the walls and floor as if the night itself was alive and holding its breath in anticipation of what was about to unfold, and she moved restlessly, tugging the blanket closer around her shoulders, trying to focus on the mundane tasks she had left undone. Yet every small sound, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, the rustle of leaves brushing against the windows, seemed amplified, each one echoing through the quiet space and making her heart pound, because she knew, instinctively, that something pivotal was about to happen, something that would change the rhythm of her life and the delicate balance of emotion she shared with Lucas, and the memory of him in the garden, the hesitant touch, the soft, searching eyes, and the weight of what he had said earlier lingered, making it impossible to ignore the pull between them, the magnetic tension that was part fear, part longing, and wholly unavoidable. And so, finally, unable to contain herself, she rose and wandered quietly through the hallways, each step measured, almost reverent, toward the living room where she sensed he might be, drawn by intuition, by the unspoken bond they shared, by the need to confront, to connect, to understand what was waiting beneath the surface of their fragile morning conversation. And she found him sitting near the fireplace, shadows dancing across his face in the flickering light, his posture tense yet deliberate, a mixture of contemplation and anticipation. And when he turned toward her, his eyes softened, illuminated by both courage and vulnerability, and he offered a tentative smile that carried 1,000 silent words, and Clara felt her chest tighten, a mixture of fear, excitement, and the undeniable pull of something neither had spoken yet both had felt for a long time, and she crossed the room slowly, each step a careful negotiation of space and emotion, until she sat down beside him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body, yet careful to maintain the fragile boundary that the night demanded, because they were adults, aware of the delicate terrain of feelings they were navigating, the weight of past experiences, the careful balance between familial connection and the deeper, more intimate currents that had begun to surface, and he spoke then, his voice low, deliberate, almost trembling with the effort of restraint. Clara, I've been thinking about us, about everything we've missed, and the words fell between them like a stone in water, creating ripples of emotion that she could feel radiating through her, stirring memories, regrets, hopes, and desires she had buried under the routines of life, and she reached instinctively for his hand, her fingers brushing against his, tentative at first, a gentle acknowledgement of connection, and he allowed the touch, holding her gaze, the flicker of vulnerability in his eyes mirrored in her own, and the silence that followed was heavy yet comforting, charged with a tension that neither wanted to break too soon, because the weight of truth demanded respect, and the intimacy of shared presence, of proximity, of unspoken understanding, was a delicate gift they were both learning to cherish, and she felt her pulse quicken, a shiver running down her spine, as she noticed the slight tremor of his fingers against hers, the catch in his breath, the subtle hesitation that carried volumes more than words could ever convey, and she realized that love, in its quietest, most profound forms, often arrives without spectacle, without announcement, and that the bravery to feel it, to acknowledge it, to exist within it, is what makes it transformative. And Lucas's eyes, searching, hopeful, tinged with fear, reflected the same truth she held within her own heart, a truth that demanded courage, honesty, and the willingness to confront emotion long ignored, and she felt tears prick the corners of her eyes, not of sadness, but of recognition, of empathy, of the joy and pain that accompany the deep ache of understanding another person completely, and he shifted slightly, brushing a loose strand of hair from her forehead with a careful hand, the gesture simple, tender, yet profoundly intimate, and Clara felt her heart lurch, the familiar warmth of maternal care intertwining with something more complicated, more tender, a delicate mixture of longing, protectiveness, and a dawning awareness of mutual desire, and she swallowed, uncertain whether to speak, to ask, to lean in, to step back, knowing that every choice carried weight, consequence, and the possibility of both joy and heartbreak, and she finally whispered, I've felt it too, this pull, this connection, and the words, tentative yet honest, hung between them, fragile yet luminous, and Lucas's gaze softened further, relief mingling with emotion, and he exhaled slowly, as if unburdening himself of thoughts he had held tightly for far too long, and the flickering firelight cast shadows across his face, illuminating the mixture of courage, fear, and hope that danced there, and Clara felt herself drawn closer, instinctively, heart and mind aligned in a silent conversation of glances, gestures, and unspoken understanding, and they allowed themselves a quiet pause, the room holding them in a suspended moment, time stretching outward, delicate and infinite, a space where emotions could breathe, where hearts could align, where trust could be rebuilt in small, careful increments, and she noticed every detail, how his hand twitched ever so slightly, how his eyes searched hers for approval, how his posture, though steady, hinted at the vulnerability beneath, and she understood that their connection was a tapestry woven from patience, longing, and the courage to face feelings that scared them both, and the subtle tension between them was a force, drawing them into a closeness that was at once comforting and electrifying, and she realized that this was not just about last night, or the morning, but about years of distance, misunderstanding, and restrained emotion finally finding a channel, a moment, a place to be recognized and honored, and she leaned in slightly, careful yet deliberate, allowing their hands to entwine fully, feeling the warmth, the subtle tremor, the heartbeat of someone who had been holding back, as she had, and the sensation was both grounding and exhilarating, reminding her that human connection, when authentic, carries a power unmatched by circumstance, environment, or time, and Lucas's gaze held hers, unwavering yet soft, vulnerable, revealing the complex mix of need, fear, and hope that had brought them both to this fragile juncture, and she felt the weight of emotion in the very air around them, charged with possibility, anticipation, and the unspoken promise of something deeper, something transformative, something worth navigating with care, courage, and openness. And he spoke again, quieter now, words almost swallowed by the crackle of the fire. "I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose you." And Clara's heart swelled, the ache of past regrets mingling with the sweetness of hope, the realization that trust, once rebuilt, could open doors to intimacy and understanding she had long feared to explore. And she nodded, tears finally spilling freely, warm against her cheeks, acknowledging the honesty, the bravery, and the delicate vulnerability that existed between them. And the firelight danced across the room as if blessing the moment, illuminating the subtle movements of their hands, the slight lean closer, the softening of expressions, the invisible thread of connection that had quietly, steadily, woven itself through years of proximity, shared space, and unspoken observation. And Clara felt herself exhale fully, the tension easing, the anticipation settling into calm, because they had crossed a threshold, fragile yet irreversible, stepping into a space where honesty, intimacy, and emotional courage coexisted. And she realized, in the hush of the night, that love, connection, and understanding were not linear, not predictable, but when embraced fully, carried the capacity to heal, transform, and renew even the most careful of hearts. And she held his gaze, feeling the unspoken promise of tomorrow, of conversations yet to be had, of trust yet to be deepened, of the tender exploration of emotion and vulnerability that would define the path ahead. And Lucas leaned in slightly, their foreheads nearly touching, the warmth of proximity electric, yet gentle, a tangible proof of the bond forming. And Clara felt the last remnants of fear dissolve, replaced by anticipation, courage, and the exhilarating uncertainty of love that was fragile, tender, and entirely theirs to nurture. And as the fire crackled softly, the shadows dancing in quiet celebration, she realized that this night, this confession, this delicate, trembling acknowledgement of feelings long restrained, had altered everything, opening a door to possibility, intimacy, and emotional richness that neither had dared hope for. And in that singular, suspended moment, with the room holding them gently, the moonlight brushing across their shoulders, the warmth of hands entwined, and hearts beating in delicate synchrony, Clara knew that their story was entering a new chapter, one built on honesty, vulnerability, and the courage to embrace what the heart demanded, no matter how uncertain. And she allowed herself to smile softly, the ache in her chest tempered by hope. And Lucas mirrored it, a shared understanding passing between them that this moment was only the beginning, the fragile first step towards something deeper, something beautiful, something unforgettable. And the night held them in its quiet embrace, a witness to the start of a connection that promised to grow, evolve, and endure, built on trust, tenderness, and the delicate art of confession. Until finally, as the fire burned lower and the moonlight softened, Clara leaned her head slightly toward him, feeling the warmth of shared understanding, the thrill of emotional courage, and the quiet, unspoken knowledge that everything had changed. And the story of them, fragile, tender, and irrevocably intertwined, was just beginning. Days passed after that night, each one carrying the quiet weight of their shared emotions, the subtle pull of connection that had begun in the living room by the fire now weaving itself into the very fabric of Clara and Lucas's lives. And though the house seemed ordinary, every glance, every touch, every shared silence felt charged with meaning, as if time itself had slowed just enough for them to notice the intricate threads of feeling that had long existed but had gone unacknowledged. And Clara found herself observing him in ways she never had before, the way he moved through the kitchen, the slight furrow of his brow when concentrating on a task, the way his hands brushed over the edge of a table, almost absent-mindedly yet full of intent, the quiet strength and vulnerability coexisting in him in a way that made her heart swell with emotion and a tender awareness of how deeply intertwined their lives had become. And Lucas, in turn, seemed attuned to the smallest shifts in her mood, the way her eyes lingered on objects that held memories, the faint sigh that escaped her lips when a thought or feeling crossed her mind. And he would reach for her hand, or offer a reassuring smile, a small gesture yet profound. And in those simple interactions, the unspoken words of last night continued to resonate, forming a new rhythm between them, delicate, careful, yet growing stronger with each passing day. And they began to communicate in glances and gestures, their own language of trust, intimacy, and understanding, subtle yet powerful, and Clara felt her heart open slowly, cautiously, yet fully, to the possibility of new beginnings, the kind of connection that is not rushed but nurtured with patience, care, and the willingness to face vulnerability together. And the more she observed him, the more she realized that Lucas was not the same boy who had walked quietly into her room months ago. He was a young man aware of his feelings, aware of hers, navigating the delicate territory of emotional honesty, and she admired him, loved him, and feared the depth of the bond they were forming all at once, and the contrast between ordinary domestic moments and the extraordinary emotions they evoked made every shared cup of tea, every quiet conversation, every passing touch feel like an adventure into the depths of the heart, a journey into understanding the complexity of love, longing, and human connection. And one evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Lucas left a small note on her pillow, simple words scrawled in his careful handwriting. "I'm here. Always, if you'll let me," and Clara felt her chest tighten, tears forming, a mixture of joy, relief, and a profound recognition that love need not be loud or dramatic to be powerful. It could be soft, patient, and steadfast, growing in quiet moments and whispered acknowledgments, and she held the note close, feeling the warmth of intention, the courage of honesty, and the subtle promise of shared days ahead. And she realized that life, in all its chaos and unpredictability, had brought them to this fragile yet undeniable understanding, and each day thereafter became a series of small yet meaningful interactions, shared laughter over morning coffee, the brush of hands when passing in the hallway, the comfortable silence of simply existing in each other's presence, the moments when a glance conveyed more than words ever could. And these moments, ordinary on the surface, carried with them the extraordinary weight of connection, intimacy, and emotional courage. And Clara noticed the beauty in these details, the curve of his smile, the way his eyes brightened at the sight of her, the gentle attentiveness in his gestures, and she realized that love, true love, was not always grand declarations but often the quiet consistency of care, attention, and presence. And Lucas seemed to understand this as well, responding to her emotions with patience, empathy, and a willingness to meet her where she was, the delicate balance of give and take forming a foundation for trust and hope that neither had dared to anticipate. And yet, as they navigated this new rhythm together, Clara felt a growing certainty that the bond they were forging could withstand uncertainty, fear, and the complexity of adult life, because it was built on honesty, respect, and the shared willingness to embrace vulnerability. And she remembered the night he had walked into her room while she slept, the hesitation in his eyes, the gentle touch, the unspoken words that had begun this journey, and she understood now that such moments are rare, fragile, yet powerful enough to redirect the course of hearts, to awaken emotions long suppressed, to create a connection that defies simple explanation yet feels inevitable once recognized. And as she reflected on these memories, she saw the subtle ways Lucas had grown, how he had taken their unspoken understanding and nurtured it, approaching each interaction with sensitivity, respect, and the gentle courage of someone willing to risk vulnerability for connection. And she admired him for this, her heart swelling with gratitude, love, and hope. And one rainy afternoon, as they sat together in the living room, the sound of raindrops tapping against the windows like a delicate percussion, Lucas took her hand in his, the gesture simple, yet infinitely meaningful, and looked into her eyes, speaking softly, "I don't want to let this fade. I want to be here, fully, with you." And Clara felt the words resonate through her, the affirmation of shared intention, mutual desire, and the courage to embrace feelings that had long been unspoken. And she nodded, tears blurring her vision, a mixture of joy, relief, and profound hope. And in that quiet, rain-filled room, the air seemed charged with the subtle energy of their connection, each heartbeat, each glance, each breath carrying the weight of understanding, trust, and tender affection. And over the weeks that followed, they continued to cultivate this connection in small but meaningful ways, a touch on the arm, a shared joke, a smile that lingered longer than necessary. And in these ordinary moments, Clara felt the extraordinary nature of their bond, realizing that love's strength lies not only in grand gestures but in the quiet, patient acknowledgement of presence, the careful tending of hearts, and the bravery to face emotions honestly and gently. And she observed how Lucas's actions mirrored her own, the subtle attentiveness, the thoughtful gestures, the careful navigation of boundaries and vulnerability. and in this delicate dance, they found comfort, joy, and a new sense of possibility. And the house itself seemed to reflect this shift, the rooms no longer simply spaces but witnesses to their evolving relationship, carrying the echoes of laughter, shared glances, gentle touches, and quiet conversations. And she noticed that even mundane routines had taken on new meaning, the act of preparing a meal together, the shared experience of tending the garden, the quiet companionship of reading in the same room, all infused with a tender awareness of presence and care. And one evening, as twilight descended and painted the sky in soft lavender and rose, Clara found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them here, the hesitation of that first night, the tentative steps in the garden, the confessions by the fire, and now this quiet, steady rhythm of connection that offered a sense of peace, hope, and emotional intimacy she had long thought unattainable. And she realized that love, in its truest form, does not demand perfection, but presence, honesty, and the courage to nurture feelings that are fragile yet enduring. And she felt her heart swell as Lucas reached for her hand once more, their fingers intertwining naturally, comfortably, as if they had always been meant to fit together in this delicate way. And the warmth, the reassurance, and the unspoken promise carried between them felt like a new beginning, a chance to build something beautiful, steady, and real. And she smiled, softly, a mixture of relief, joy, and anticipation, and he mirrored her smile, a silent acknowledgement of shared understanding, trust, and the quiet, profound beauty of hearts opening to one another. And Clara knew that the journey ahead would not be without challenges, that life's complexities would test their patience, courage, and emotional resilience, yet she felt a deep, abiding confidence that they could face it together, strengthened by the foundation they were carefully building, the honesty, vulnerability, and presence that had guided them from uncertainty to hope. And as she looked into Lucas's eyes, shimmering with tenderness and trust, she realized that sometimes the most transformative moments come quietly, without fanfare, in ordinary settings, with gestures that seem small but carry infinite weight. And that the night he had walked into her room while she slept, the garden morning, the fire-lit confessions, all had been necessary steps leading them here, to this fragile, luminous space of shared heartbeats, unspoken understanding, and a new beginning that promised growth, joy, and love. And she felt the subtle thrill of anticipation for the days to come, the quiet certainty that this bond, nurtured with care, patience, and honesty, would endure. And in the hush of the evening, with rain tapping softly against the windows, hands entwined, hearts aligned in delicate synchrony, Clara realized that the story of them, tentative yet profound, fragile yet enduring, had entered its most meaningful chapter, one that would continue to unfold with tenderness, courage, and the quiet, steady magic of love finally recognized and embraced. And she allowed herself to breathe fully, to sink into the comfort, warmth, and emotional richness of their shared presence, knowing that the night he had walked in while she slept had changed everything, opening a door to connection, intimacy, and a new beginning that was theirs to cherish, nurture, and grow, step by careful step, heart by heart, in a rhythm of trust, tenderness, and enduring love that would define the days, months, and years to come. And as the fire crackled low and the moonlight softened across the room, Clara rested her head slightly against Lucas's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the warmth of his hand holding hers, and the quiet, profound knowledge that everything had shifted irrevocably, beautifully, and forever. And that the story of them, fragile, tender, and luminous, was just beginning its most extraordinary chapter.